So I'm gonna basically I'm gonna go through kind of an exploratory process. So I think one of the questions was kind of a little bit kind of in the periphery of this, which is like, is generative art kind of do you start out with something in mind or do you discover it? I think there've been a lot of conversations about that. And so today I have to kind of admit I'm going to be freestyling a little bit and exploring. So, but that's most of the time that's the kind of process that I go through. I'm going to walk you guys through kind of how this code works. And this is what I would consider bare bones, like just what's necessary to create a blank canvas. So if I run this, first of all, the code that we're looking at here is RStudio, and you can see this is my R art folder that I save everything into in unnamed files. Um, so anyway, this is in RStudio. You have a lot of different little panes. Your environment. This is kind of a setup if you guys are familiar with MATLAB. This is where variables are stored. If you're just printing things to see a plot and let's see a histogram, you don't need it saved to a file. A lot of times you would see it here. There's help. RStudio is free software. So I think like if you're ever interested in R, that's a great reason to play around with it. I've also should say I've upped the font size. I'm hoping everyone can see it okay. And then down here is the console, and I'm gonna just resize this a little bit because I'm can't quite see the bottom of my console, which is going to be annoying to me. Here we go. Okay. So this little flashing thing, if I say this is kind of classic programming. Okay, here, if I type it into the console, I can see numbers, and I can type in a variable name if there's something in store. So I ran my code once. So I'm going to start by clearing out my environment. There's this little broom up here, just wipe it out. And now we have nothing in the environment. There's no variables, there's no packages, nothing. And then just what we're looking at in R, this is just how I do it. Again, this is not a good example or a bad example. This is just my style. So I like to have the date in my file names, and I have to tell it where to go. So it's going into this directory. This is kind of an important thing. This P and Z and this for loop here, what it's doing is if I want to create 20 outputs or 10 outputs of a code, a lot of times I would just use this, and this is just basically carrying a variable down into here where it'll generate 10 images. And if I want the output to be deterministic so that I get the same thing every time I run the code, which is really important for prints actually, and for NFTs when I want to do larger NFTs, what I'll do here is uncomment set seed. And as this for loop runs, it's actually feeding this the randomizer a particular integer, a very specific number, and that number sets the stage for all the randomization that will occur for the whole code. And so this for loop seeds that randomizer with a different number each time because of the way this is running with a for loop, and so we get deterministic output. So once we get some random numbers, I can kind of uncomment or comment that to let you see what happens. And again, there may be a better way to do this, but this is how I do it. So the file name here, it tells it this is just a sprintf kind of classic command, but this is going to be the number for the image, 1 through 10 or 1 through 100 or whatever. This is going to receive the variable for the date, and then this is the path. And then this is the stuff we were talking about with the TIFF format. So this is, again, it's just real standard. You're generating scientific plots to want to use TIFF files. And so here I'm specifying a 5x5 by 600 dpi resolution image, and it's LZW compressed. So this is real, nothing too interesting yet, but it's just important background. Whenever you use a TIFF command like that, you have to turn off the device when you're done. And if you don't, you get things like intentional error, where that black thing appeared on top of the image, and that may still happen, but at any rate, you need to close your file in order to actually be able to view it later. And then this stuff basically tells our where the boundaries of the image should be. So if I want to create like a little margin around, this is some voodoo from R that will do that. And this part of the code basically makes the image hug the margins, which is it's difficult to explain, but usually what we want is an L-bounded plot with an X and a Y axis, and we want labels and numbers. And in this case, I want to suppress all of that stuff. And so that's helping me do that by pushing the margins, by pushing the image out to the edge and not allowing for a regular margin to appear. This is arbitrary, but I always try to set the boundaries in proportion to each other. If I have an image that's wider or taller, like if I want to have something that's 4 by 5, which is a pretty common proportion, then I just have to adjust this. And the reason you do that is if you're using geometry like circle equations and stuff like that, you don't want to get ovals, you want to get a circle. So you just make the space proportional to the frame. And that's how you have to do that here. It's done differently in different languages. For a blank plot, this is something that's just kind of I haven't found a good way around this yet. And this works, so it's fine. But the blank plot, what this is doing is just basically throwing a single point up into a corner somewhere. But it's creating a plot, really importantly. Apparently you can't use Polygon or Polypath to set up, to just start drawing in a TIFF file. You have to have a plot. So this is spaghetti code right there. The background polygon, what this does is it fills in the image with a particular color. So if I want to have a white background, I'd say white. A lot of times I like to use gray 20, which is a real dark gray. So that can be there. And then this is the boundary edge. And so I don't rewrite this stuff. A lot of times I modify it or I'll comment it out if I don't want a boundary. But I'm just putting that stuff out there right now because it's not interesting to code all that, because it's basically a piece of paper I'm drawing on. So that really briefly, let me see. Okay, so there's no questions about that. Good. So that's the setup. So that's basically how I just do the bare bones. So if I run this code in R, there's a bunch of different ways you can select all and then execute it with a control enter. If I run source, this is a real easy way to get the output. And so now we have this image in the proportions that we talked about, 4 by 5. If I want to make it square, I just I took this back to 5 by 5 and then made this 1000 by 1000. Okay, there we go. We have a square now. Okay, so real basic stuff. This is just the canvas that we're going to draw on. And then, a lot of times if I'm just trying to just imagine, just see something and, draw some points and then see what I see, I might start with things like either a circle or some random points, but I think today I want to start with the circle equation. So I'll start with the points that are going to be fed into a circle, into a cosine and sine functions. This is just a sequence from 0 to 2, like 100. This is, if you're not entirely sure what's going on there, it's trigonometry. But what I'm going to do here is put those numbers in, multiply by pi, feed that into cosine, and now I have your just basic circle with no radius and no position in space yet. And so do that for y. Hopefully this will get a little more interesting in a second. Okay, so now we have basics for a circle. So we got to remember these variable names. SK is probably going to be less and less important as we go on, but CX and CY are going to be really, really important. Okay, so now let's do some random circles around the place. I will just create a, let's see, number of points. I don't know, 10. And then
Hey, Kenny, it might be fun to take some numbers, some random numbers once you've set it up. We could ask some of the folks watching for some random numbers that they call out and just see what happens.
Oh, totally.
Like a
Yeah.
number
In fact,
between
why don't we do that
between what and what,
Yeah, yeah. Why don't we do that right now for the number of points? So this is going to be like the number of circles that I'm going to draw.
Okay,
And
great.
just
So yeah,
whoever
put a random
comes up with a number
number.
first, I'll replace 10 with that.
Yeah, so okay,
Okay.
great. We've got 7.
Okay. We're going to have 7 circles. And that'll be deterministic. Yeah. Okay. And so
we just
the
got a
next
number
thing I need to
8,192.
it's pretty big. I'm trying to think if I can do that for the radius. What was it? 8,972.
8,192.
Okay, here we go. Might have to do that divide by 10 just to fit it on the screen here. But anyhow, we'll let that'll be the radius. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is I need to come up with some random x coordinates. So this is just a nice function for pulling random numbers. And actually, I can do two right here. So we'll call this xy. So this is a real simple way to do this, especially in the context of a square. So what this is going to do, each time I run this, when I select it and run it, you can see down in the console window that different numbers are coming out. And so when I just do this part, they're all positive numbers between 0 and 2000. And when I subtract a number between 0 and 2000 from 1000, then you get numbers distributed around the origin, which is 0, 0 in the center of this plot. That's where it's going to appear. So, and then this argument is saying give us two numbers. So, so I think we have everything we need basically for a circle, and I'm just going to borrow this function here. A good coder is not afraid to copy and paste a bunch of stuff, so saves you time. So okay, so we have. I'm just going to keep going with this kind of confusing naming convention and do RD, so that's the radius, times CX. So that'll give us a circle with a particular radius. And then the x dimension will be xy1. Square brackets are how you index vectors in R. And so I'm just taking the second point there. So now we have a radius times the sine part of the circle function here. So we have cxx, cyy. Those are going to be our circle coordinates. And there is something kind of cool about polypath, which is the function I'm using here. So polygon is extremely similar in R, but polypath allows you to cut out shapes. So that's something we might want to think about. But at any rate, we'll hang on to that thought for a second. So I'm going to make the border. What color should I make the border? Don't ask. Any suggestions? Let's see. Pink, magenta, 811. Oh, that was the number. Sorry. Okay, we'll go with magenta, but here's a neat tool. So our colors. So this is one of my favorite websites. Basically, this is a PDF file that somebody in the statistics department at columbia.edu came up with, which is great. So I'm trying to remember if there's literally a color called magenta. There is, and I think I like the, well, dark magenta is not going to really stand out here, so we'll do magenta 3. Okay, so this is one way you can select colors. There are lots of alternatives to that, but we'll do this. So when you do color equals NA, basically what you're doing is you're filling the shape with nothing. So what we're going to get is a circular outline. And one thing that I really like to do is not just have the same line thickness for everything. So just as an example, so this is just going to give me a number between 0 and 1. That's what that piece of code does. And by doing 0.25, I just make sure that there's some line that you can actually see. Okay, so that's what that code is accomplishing. And I'm just executing it over and over down here so you can see it. Now when I run it, we're going to have 7 circles. There are going to be magenta boundaries, and let's see what happens. Okay, so this is an example of really just the first sort of attempt. And so to me, the radius looks a little too big still, so I'm going to do this. And that's too small, so we'll just keep playing around with it a little. Of course, it's probably easier to get rid of 8192, but we don't want to do that. So
We have some other numbers that came in if you
for...
want to try plugging them in.
Oh, sure. What's a good
Anywhere.
number?
We've got the number 420.69.
Okay, let me try that. Interesting. That's actually about the right size. And so I think what I want to do here to make these different sizes is I'm going to make it 420. Not sure I can do much with the 69. Maybe I'll make it plus 69. And so what that's going to do now is have a minimum size of 69 and then up to 420 added to 69 as the radii. And so you can see this produces kind of a nice distribution of circle sizes. So I think we can work with that. What's another number that we could use for number of points? I think you said that there were some numbers just piling in.
We've got 811.
Oh, that's going to be a lot of circles. Let's try it. Whoa. But I kind of, you can already sort of see where this would be like, okay, I think we can use this.
Whoa.
There's a lot going on here. I've made myself, I decided that I was going to tie my hands and not use my subfunctions, but one thing that I would probably play with a lot here would be transparency. But an alternative to using transparency can be using thinner lines. So sometimes if you use thinner lines, you can get an effect that's very similar to having different shades of a color. So if I do that, we can maybe a little too thin. So, but we can get things that basically start looking like brighter and darker. I think I blew that one up there. Let's see. But what we can get here is kind of you can kind of see that, right, where there's like some depth in this now. And that's just coming from having different line thicknesses and not, we're not playing around with different colors. We're not playing around with transparency or anything like that. We're already getting some results that kind of look interesting. Somebody said pink earlier as a color, and I'm thinking that maybe a fill. We may be pushing our luck, but it may be worth a try. So let me grab pink from over here. We'll just use maroon. It's right there. It looks pink to me. I'm hoping this doesn't just. We'll see what happens. Oh, bubble gum. Okay, I think we're gonna go back to. There we go. But what we can do is we can still use that color. We use it here, and I'll just make a list. So it's a vector, and the vector will be indexed by a random number between 1 and 2. So the first thing would be magenta. The second thing would be maroon.
We have a question.
Yeah.
We have a question from Meefs. Meefs is asking, do these lines have an alpha channel?
So there is a way to play with alpha. Yeah, and so one of my sort of custom functions that I use, it basically converts these colors into RGB format, and then in RGB you can play with alpha. So off the top of my head, this was something that I looked up and kind of figured out a while ago, and that's why I didn't want to do it live, because it's something I don't think I can recreate in a short period of time. But there is absolutely an alpha channel, and so you can use that to and I do use that a lot actually in my artwork. So it's not it's definitely something that you could normally play around with. But I find that when I'm messing around with transparency or messing around with line thickness, that I can achieve very similar results. And I kind of like the spongy sort of corally looking thing we have going on here. Wondering if I take this down to 42, and let's make this 6.9. We start getting something that's, yeah, maybe not. Yeah, that was looking a little too early Windows screens or desktop for my tastes. But yeah. So the other thing that we can do that's sometimes fun with polygons would be to create lines. Um, so one thing that we can do is just say 1 through 20, and then we can pick sort of random places in the circle circumference. So I'm going to just do this for a second. So we're going to just have one circle for a second. And so, we're just going to do one circle. And the reason I'm going to do that is to show what connecting these 20 random coordinates would look like. So if I make it 100, because this length is 100 up here, I'm going to be pulling from the 100 coordinates that make up this circumference. And I'm going to call it random xy. If I do that, I should get numbers between 1 and 100. And then I want to connect those points. So I can call it like, let's call it rxx. So this is going to be the random x point. And this is going to pull a random point from this vector up here, which was the x coordinates of the circle circumference. And so I'll do rxy. I now have to pull the first thing out of rxy, which is indexed here. So R has this tricky square bracket syntax, and sometimes the square brackets do different things. But so I'm going to do the same, repeat the same thing for the y coordinates here. So in CYY, I'm going to grab the, in this case, if RXY was 67 and 4, what it would be doing is starting at 0. 0 through 2 goes this way around the circle until you get to 100, because I said I want 100 points between 0 and 2. So these are in radians. And so 67 would be like, well, if this is 50, then it's probably about here. And 4 would be closer to the 0 points, it'd be somewhere around here. And without rerunning that randomizer, we're going to draw a line. So I literally am just going to grab this plot command up here and just turn it into a line function. So rxx. Oh, and actually, now that I think about it, we have to have both of these points here. So actually I can do this too. 1 through 2. Okay, because this is two different. We need to have an origin. I'm going to have a start point and an end point in x and then y. So that's what this is going to do. So now if I do that, we get 2 points. Okay, great. So now we have to see where those points are. Let's do xx, ryy. There's a bunch of junk here, gibberish that just suppresses the labels and stuff like that that we do not want in our artwork. And now that we're making more lines, I think what I want to do is assign a color up here. Oh, yeah. That way these lines will be the same color. There. And then we'll do something similar in terms of the line thickness. And in R, you have to tell it that this is not a point, that this is going to be a line. So I'm getting a text. Let me make sure that everything is okay. Cool. So this is type equals L. There we go. Let me try running it. Should see, yep. So we can now see a circle with these 20 connections. So maybe let's up this to, I don't know, 50. Yeah, that looks. I don't know, busy. It's really busy. Maybe 10. There we go. That's starting to get more interesting to look at. One thing that we can do sometimes is make these different circles kind of approach one another or connect to each other in some way, which might be interesting. Another thing I can do is just up the number of points that make up these circles, so they start looking a little more solid. So what I'm doing here is just changing this number. This for loop is just picking 2 random coordinates along each of these circumferences, and I circumferences. I think I'm saying circumferi like radii. Is it circumferi or circumference?
I don't know what
I
the
don't
right
know.
word is. You got me.
I mean, I'm such a geometrician, and I'm really not professionally a geometrician at all. So anyway, um, so we have these circles, and then we have these lines kind of creating these artificial surfaces inside these circles. That's kind of cool. Maybe what we want to do though is have these things not be cut off by the edges of the screen. Right? So there's some geometry that we can use to solve that problem. We can basically say if the center coordinate is too close to the edge, then like bring the radius in a little bit. That's one way to do it. The lazy man's method would be to actually say pick a smaller range of center coordinates for these. That might also be a good idea to just kind of cluster everything towards the middle of the image. So we're gonna go with the lazy method. There you go. So this is now, I just cut the space in half where these circles can be. Okay, that's a little, I don't know. So some of these outputs are kind of starting to look more interesting.
Kenny, we have a question from
Sure.
Janix. Is there a way in
Okay.
our code to make them? I don't know that there is, but is there a way to animate in our code?
Oh, good question. So in theory, you can save these images individually, and for that, I would recommend saving them out as JPEGs. And then literally all I use is an onboard just free animation kit thing that came with Windows. So you can actually line up these individual images. It's insane. And I suspect that I know that there are for example GIF animation type of things that you can do in R. I don't frequently use them myself, but I believe they kind of use a similar principle as well.
Oh,
So they'll be
interesting.
saving out, yeah, they'll save 1,000 plots out, and then they'll execute a command in Image Magic or something like that, like another software that you have to install but can be accessed from R. And then yeah, you can definitely animate, but it's not as easy as other languages. So yeah, that's one reason that I haven't done a whole lot of animation. Um, because it would be fun to make these things move around the screen, bounce off the boundaries,
Totally.
and things like that, or cruise past the edge and come around or something. Yeah, yeah,
P5
um,
is great for that.
absolutely, yeah, yeah, yeah. I think it's interesting because P5 is it looks like for geometry kind of representations like this. I think it would be really good. I think I don't know. I'm blown away by stuff I feel like a couple artists I've seen using Houdini, which I have no idea if that's even I don't know if that's like a 3D sculpture thing, or I don't know if that can be generative or is generative, but I've seen some amazing stuff where it's like water splashing and waves hitting each other, and just neat stuff. That's kind of when I get in think about animation. A lot of times I'm like, that would be amazing to do. That's impossible in art, but it's and I feel like that would be too hard to do in this.
I think Houdini is
So
a
one thing
3D animation, and it's like special effects and 3D animation, like maybe similar
is it kind of
to.
like CGI?
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
so. Yeah, I think it's 3D
yeah,
software for like
yeah.
modeling and
I,
stuff.
yeah, I'd accept that. It's the stuff that I've seen. There's a guy. I think it's I'm gonna mess up his name, but I know his last name is Navarro, and I follow him on Instagram, and he does some really incredible stuff. I think he's a musician too. But at any rate, it's um, yeah, yeah, really cool stuff. So okay, so I'm thinking about what were we thinking about? We could do some fun things with this, um, one thing that well, let's say one thing that might be fun to do would be to try to shift some of these a little bit. So one thing I was thinking about before was CXX. Let's try this 1 through 50 because we know that 50 points are the first half, so it's the top half of the circles, right? So one thing I was thinking about was moving them a little bit. And so I'm going to reference itself and say, we're going to cover up those values with some new ones, but they're I'm going to modify the old ones in some way. And what I was thinking about was just trying to shift them, and it could be like, I don't know, you could just do something real basic, like um, sample these things. And then we have to, I think we need to multiply this by something. So maybe I'll just make this 100 just to start with. So like shifting these, or maybe by our, oh, I know, 0.5 and point. And so it's going to be positive or negative 0.5, and then multiply that by RD. So it's going to shift the circle half of the radius one way or the other. And I just want to see how that looks. It's interesting, but it's really busy now, so I'm going to cut down the number of circles so you can see it a little better. Ooh, that's interesting, right? So we can kind of see that. And looking at these shapes, I keep thinking I'm going to shift them a little bit more. So this is, you can kind of see the exploratory process here a little bit. I'm gonna fill them in black because that'll actually be darker than the background. Okay, didn't quite look as nice as I thought it would. Let me try gray 10. Something a little darker, but maybe not that. A little better. I don't know. Getting like a strong Peeps vibe from this for some reason. Like the Easter candy. But maybe if I rotate, you know what I'm saying? Like I'm totally seeing this marshmallow treat. Not what I'm going for. So I'm gonna change this a little bit and make it the vertical. Let's try that. So we're gonna make it the we're gonna shift we're gonna shift them vertically instead of horizontally. How that works a little better. More peep like or less peep? Oh, it created like weird.
Ooh.
Not what I was going for either. So I'm gonna go back to the thing I was comparing to peeps. Oh, I see. Okay. And actually, that having done that, I realized the mistake that I was making on the first thing. So first of all, this is your friend. There's a Control Shift C and R that allows you to comment code out. So you don't have to do that. What I just did. And then if we make this 25 through 75 instead, I forgot that like to shift it vertically, we need to go up here. So if this is 50, so this can go 25 to 75. We'll give you the vertical halves that we could shift up and down. So 25 to 75. So this is where, like I said, I had to kind of like relearn trigonometry, really think a lot about circles and how they're put together. I think this is actually a lot more interesting, and for some reason less peep like. You don't want a lot of peeps in your generative art.
I mean,
unless you
maybe,
love peeps.
yeah,
Some
maybe
people
you
do.
do.
I don't judge, but I don't love peeps myself. But the other thing I'm going to do here is make this radius. I'm going to make them a little more similar in size. I'm getting some things that are kind of vaguely interesting and spaceship-like. I think that's okay. It's kind of interesting how the colors, when you only have a couple of these, are kind of blending a little bit. Like they kind of. So I think I'm gonna live dangerously here and go back up to 811. Oh, and I know we're getting low on time, so I'll try to. Here we go. Small number.
We have a question from Meefs.
Yeah.
Meefs is asking, is there a way to go back or revert to the previous iteration?
Mm-hmm.
Because some
Yeah,
look
it's a
really
good
interesting
question.
but could be lost to time if ran again.
Yeah. This is where the software engineers and I part company. So it is definitely possible to create these things called forks, or like to oh, that's interesting. Yeah, so yes, in theory, like in good programming practice, you should be able to do that. And I think for me, because this is something that's kind of like, uh, you might knit, you might like knitting, and people who knit will do that when they're kind of like drumming their fingers on the desktop. Like I don't feel like it's super important to the art to have good software practices. Like, I think this is more like something that I'm doing to kind of occupy my mind, kind of move into a certain space. So no, I do lose a lot of good stuff. It's wasteful. Like this method is, it's not wasteful in terms of materials, but it's sometimes a little wasteful in terms of effort. But there is Control Z and there's Control Shift Z, which allows you to undo your undos. But but yeah, it can be a little frustrating sometimes to finish a coding session and be like, shoot, I should have kept that. Which is why
And
you'll see like in my file folder, you'll see these like these points where I was like, oh, I gotta keep it here, and then oh, there's 930B, yeah, no, that's good, and then like no, 930, no, D. So it just keeps going and going. So there are times where like, but usually what my role is just kind of do it. I'll save my fork at the end of the night when I'm done working on it, and then I'm like, no, it's not done. So,
so Rock is asking
sorry.
if you use GitHub for version control or any version control system.
No, that's exactly what I had in mind though when I was saying like you can save forks and things like that. Like
Right, right, right.
it's totally possible to do that, and it just hasn't been part of my art practice. And I do feel like I don't want to keep returning to the same thing, So it's kind of like I don't like I want to just I like starting with a fresh slate. As soon as I finish something, I like to have a blank screen again and then start from there. But but yeah, there are a lot of intermediary things. I had a video a while ago that was like a works in progress video where I showed all of the intermediate forms that like this artwork passes through before it's finished, and you could tell the software engineers and my friends because they were immediately annoyed that like I had really good stuff that got lost along the way. It just got deleted. There's just no going back to it. Yeah, but um, but I just feel like you kind of the value of this comes from finding something that's really special and really unique and one in a thousand iterations. Like in terms of your code writing iterations. And so I don't want to go back and pick through the stuff that I discarded or got rid of or felt like it wasn't done. Um, and if it's a good idea, then the idea lives in my memory somewhere, right? It'll resurface. Yeah. I think. I mean, I don't know.
We hope.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think that's a really
So,
interesting point though that you raise. Like,
mhm.
um, if you didn't like it, if it wasn't good enough for you to say, okay, this is done or this is something I want to pursue, then I think there is something to be said for just like moving on and not kind of sorting through like kind of in retrospect being like, oh, but maybe there was something there. And like, it's kind of a cool practice to be like, it's either like, it's either a fuck
Yeah,
yes or it's a no,
yes.
right?
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, yeah. And I'm sure as a musician, like when you're writing a song, like it's very similar. Like you can spend a really long time on something that ends up, and this is true in science as well, 100%. Like, you can get sort of fixated on something and work on it forever, and that's what I do not want to do with this because it's my creative
Yeah.
outlet. And so like, I like it's it's more important to me to just cover ground and to keep moving and keep seeing new stuff and have it bubble up than to worry too much about the potential treasures I've discarded along the way.
I totally
But
agree. It's the
GitHub and
same.
yeah,
Yeah, it's the same for me
yeah.
with music. It's like because I have a phone. My phone is full of voice memos that I would have a
Hmm.
little idea and I'd be like, "Oh, I think that could be good," and I would record it. But the songs that I
Hmm.
actually go on, the really amazing songs that I've written are the ones that I can't
Yeah,
like if they come through, if they kind of come into my head, I have to stop whatever I'm doing and sit down and write the full thing. They're not the things where I'm
Yeah,
just like, oh, this would make a good song that I could write later. Like those are never the ones. Like I think I've
yeah,
sorted through those little bits of audio recordings in so many times, thinking maybe there's something good in there, and it's never the
yep,
case. It's always the ones that I'm just like, I have to stop everything I'm doing right now and get this out. Those are the real
yeah,
winners.
yeah. Yeah, and to be fair, like I work full time in science, so when I sit down in front of the computer late at night after everything else is taken care of, and it's like a little bit of time before I go to sleep, like it's important to me that I find things that are going to be that type of idea. Where it's just like I have to finish this thing. It's going to keep me up, but this one is good, and so um, yeah, but, there's probably a few good art pieces in there that have gotten lost to time, but if they're really great, they'll come back.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
they'll
So
they'll
I don't
make their
want to
way back
keep
into
you here
my
too long,
imagination.
Kenny. I
Yeah.
don't want us to keep you
Oh
here all
yeah, it's after
night.
10.
So I
Yeah,
think that we should wrap it up for now. And we
totally.
had some
Yeah.
questions about like what's going to happen with this piece, you know?
Hmm.
Are you going to
Yeah.
save it and keep working on it, or is it just kind of what do you think?
Yeah. I think part of the reason I wanted to do this was to have a piece that I started here. So I'm going to continue to kind of explore it and play around with the code until it may look really different or it may be recognizable to people who've sat in here. But yeah, I definitely want to keep playing with this idea until it's a finished work.
I love
And in
that.
fact, like yeah,
That's very
totally.
exciting because there's stuff that we might be able
Yeah,
to do with that when it's ready to
definitely.
be done something with.
Yeah. I have a feeling the colors, some of this may change a little bit before it's finished, but I think we've got kind of an interesting start here.
Yeah, I
I
love
like
how it
I like
looks
all
like
the
they're
little pink and purple
wrapped.
threads.
They look like it looks like
Yeah,
objects that are
exactly.
like wrapped in like a spider web almost or something. It's
That's
really
exactly what I was thinking.
so
Yeah,
cool.
exactly. It's encased. Yeah, really
Yeah.
cool.
All right. Well, let's let you get on with your night and everybody who
Yeah,
came
yeah,
tonight. This has been so fun, and I think we're gonna. I
yeah,
mean, I loved it personally, and I have a feeling we'll be doing more of these. And
totally.
this is just the first one, and everybody here is obviously super early to the Discord, and I'm really appreciate the community that's building around your art. I think it's super exciting, and I think what we want to do is also do stuff that the community gets excited about. So
Yeah,
anyone, feel free to post stuff in in the general channel and let us know other stuff that you might like to do. These sessions I think could be super fun to do, like start more pieces this way every now and like maybe we even do like one a month that's like a community or originated piece or
yeah,
something, or one every so
yeah,
often. I don't know. We'll talk about it, but we're really just
yeah.
yeah,
Mhm.
we'll see. We'll
Yeah,
see
and I
what we
think
do.
there's so many questions from people who are interested in using R for code art, or people
Hmm.
who just want to get into generative art in general, or like how to do code art. So I think yeah, it's fun to kind of demonstrate. So yeah. So thank you everybody
Definitely.
for coming tonight, and Tara, thank you so much for coordinating this and everything. This has been a really fun evening.
It's been fun for me too. It's
Yeah,
amazing. Thank you
yeah,
for being willing to do this for us and
yeah. You bet.
to share your process. I think it's really wonderful to get a little peek behind the curtain of how you create.
Definitely.
And yeah, thank you all for
Yeah.
coming, and we'll end it now and be back really soon with more
All
probably.
right.
All right. Thanks
All
again,
right. Well, have a
Kenny.
good night, everybody. Yeah. Bye bye.
Bye.